Argentina is a large country with a population of 45 million. Its neighbor Chile is smaller at 18 million. The two do have some border disagreements in their history, and they do share a long border at a whopping 3,200 miles. The two have armies of comparable size. So, if it ever comes to a war between the two, which country would prevail? When one looks at the overall ground forces of the two countries, they seem quite comparable in numbers. Even when it comes to actual maneuver units, the numbers are again roughly similar. But the differences start to emerge as we look at the position of those ground troops. Evidently, Argentina is geared towards protecting its coastline and its northern border, while Chile distributes its armed forces evenly across the country. Given that Argentina is not a small country and that Chile is pretty narrow, it means Chile has a lot more troops right next to the border compared to Argentina. That proximity to the border means Chile would be first to cross into its opponent's territory, likely on multiple points along the border. Of course, the geography of the area would not allow quick progress everywhere. The Andes are especially high up in the north. Almost half of the border between the two countries features mountains going over 10,000 feet up, with peaks reaching 16,000 feet. The Andes do get a bit more tame as they approach the southern tip of the continent, but even in the south, the peaks reach over 3,000 feet high. So the fight would for the most part be between dispersed infantry units and not huge formations of vehicles. Indeed, given the huge border the two countries share, the number of roads between the two is minuscule, and those are fairly narrow mountain passes. Any attempt to funnel large vehicle formations would be stopped by mountain troops fairly easily. Still, if Chile does get to act quickly, it could use its proximity to the border and probably move some troops over the mountains into Argentina. The Chilean army has some conscripts, which serve usually 1 year, while the Argentina's army is all professional. But in reality, the state of Argentina's military leaves a lot to be desired, as the officials save on everything, so the military trains infrequently. Chile could conceivably get some of its tanks and artillery into Argentina. Its arsenal is newer and more capable than Argentina's. Argentinian tanks are basically of 1970s vintage and have not received significant upgrades. Their indigenous TAM tank had 3 attempts at modernization in the last 20 years, but each one yielded only a few modernized vehicles before contract cancellation. It's likely though that most of the Argentinian hardware wouldn't even get to face their attackers though. The key drawback to the Argentinian counterattack would be their lack of air power. Most Argentinian large vehicle formations would be intercepted by the Chilean Air Force. Chile has a decent air force for its size. Most of its F-16s are old but have been modernized. They can all use fairly modern weapons such as AMRAAMs and guided bombs. And the F-5s and aviojets could be used for combat air support missions. Facing them, Argentina doesn't really have a way to fight them. Their combat air force has been dissolving for a few decades now. Old Mirage fighters have been retired some years ago, and the A4 Skyhawk fleet is down to several operable planes. At one point in 2017, not a single Skyhawk was airworthy. And Skyhawks aren't really a match for F-16s. Subsonic, with weak sensors and with heat-seeking missiles only. They're unlikely to make a sizable dent in Chilean air capability. There are some 20 Skyhawks in reserve, but it's unlikely more than a handful could even take to the skies in an emergency. And it's plausible their systems and weapons would not work either, due to a lack of spare parts and maintenance. Some of Argentina's Navy's Super Étendard planes are also available, but they are maritime striker planes and would be wasted on air combat. Modernized Pampa trainers could in a pinch throw a bomb, but again, they lack the numbers to make a difference. Both sides have additional trainers, but they're fairly devoid of any modern equipment and would likely be imprecise in bombing raids and would be easy prey to any air defense system. Speaking of which, Argentina could not count on air defenses either. Aside for some short-range AA artillery, their most potent system is RBS-70 Portable SAM. They have over 100 launchers, of which a third are the quite new NG variant. Still, they're all short-range systems. Basically, Chilean planes and drones could fly even at low to medium altitudes, without much fear. The importance of that can't be overstated. Chile would have the advantage in situational awareness. It would be able to deliver airstrikes to strategic targets, or pick off Argentinian artillery, for example, for as long as it has guided weapons. But those aren't numerous in Chilean inventory, so sooner rather than later, Chileans would need to resort to using unguided bombs, which means either being quite imprecise to the point of tactical uselessness, dropping them from 12,000 feet, or going low for precise hits against Argentina's vehicles, for example, and risking getting shot down. Purchasing further guided weapons from the world's companies that do make them would require possibly a full year. So while Argentina does have decent artillery numbers, in practice the Chilean edge would be even greater than shown here. Their multiple rocket launchers would be especially lethal due to their guided rounds. Using helicopters and limited paradrops, Chile could also try to perform incursions over the Andes up north. At the same time, Argentina might have a harder time to reciprocate due to the Chilean Air Force cover. Of course, helicopter incursions would be very much subject to shoulder-launched missiles, so it would be quite dangerous even for the Chileans. Argentina does have a bigger helicopter fleet, even though it may be questionable if most are in flyable condition. It's a larger country with a bigger population, so the need to reach remote parts of its own country is greater. Drones and recon assets would aid with reconnaissance, though they would periodically get discovered and shot down. Argentinian solutions are mostly homemade, while Chile bought theirs from abroad. Both sides could rely on satellites for recon, and Argentina is pretty strong there. They have 7 commercial satellites that they would probably commandeer with decent resolution, so large formations of Chilean forces would likely not go unnoticed. Naval forces are another area where Argentina has neglected to fund their side. Much has been written in the media of the state of their ships and submarines. They allegedly sail very rarely, and most of the systems and missiles on Argentinian ships are well past their maintenance date. Chile has more submarines, and its vessels are on the average newer with decent armament. The 3 Argentinian frigates in theory have the ASPEED medium-range SAM systems and anti-ship missiles, but even if those work as advertised, the Chilean technological edge and the submarine and air power edge would keep the Argentinian Navy at bay. The conflict on the seas would not matter that much if it wasn't for Tierra del Fuego, the southern tip of the continent. Argentina has a big piece of the largest island, but it's very likely it would get cut off quickly, while the Chilean Air Force and Navy would be preventing Argentinian ground and naval forces from resupplying it. Island de los Estados would also eventually fall into Chilean hands. Chile has a much more robust amphibious assault capability. Argentina has repurposed its last Type 42 destroyer into a troop carrier, which relies on helicopters and small boats to transfer troops. Chile would likely be able to transfer 1,000 troops in one go, while Argentina would struggle with 300. Both sides operate some maritime patrol and anti-submarine planes, but due to Chilean air superiority, it's questionable if Argentina could make much use of their fleet. Chile is likely to use the relatively permissive topography of the southern tip to cut off the Argentinian part of the largest Tierra del Fuego island and endure Argentinian counterattacks there. The rest of the front line over the Andes would be too much for either side to monitor, but Chile would be especially ill-advised to try an offensive there. The remainder of Chilean forces would be best used as a quick reaction force on the western side of the Andes, in case Argentina tries to push through anywhere. Argentina would, after it mobilizes, have more troops, and it would be able to use its numerical superiority over the length of the border on the Andes to try and perform surprise incursions over the mountains, nibbling away at certain places alongside the long mountainous front. Argentina would certainly try to take advantage of the fact Chile is very narrow and try to sever it, but it's not likely any such offensive would yield permanent success. This part would likely see much fighting, as Chile is less than 15 miles wide here. Chile does have a fairly robust ferry network though, precisely due to its geography, so it would likely be able to resupply even if temporarily severed. Any Argentinian unexpected breach over the Andes would be possible only by fairly light infantry forces, while Chile could respond with both air support and heavy vehicles. Chile would not, however, likely try to push much inside Argentina. Due to greater territory depth and fairly small military forces, Chile could not afford to push equally at all points of the front, which means any push into Argentina would end up with a salient that's much exposed to Argentina's counterattacks. Over time, Argentina would amass more troops. Its reserves and paramilitary today are fairly slim, but its mobilization potential is higher. The near-term goal for Argentina's reserve force is 10,000 troops, which is still 4 times fewer than the Chilean reserve force. Argentina does have some aces up its sleeve. As said, it's more populous, almost 3 times over. It has a bigger economy, which means it could buy more stuff from abroad. And it has a bigger domestic arms industry, however underfunded and neglected it is right now. But all those factors would form a basis for a strong rearmament effort. Adjusted for purchasing power parity, Argentina's GDP was almost twice as big in 2018. One may wonder, why is the Argentinian military in such a sorry state in the first place? Well, it's always about politics. Argentina, being more populous, is actually less wealthy per citizen, and it has had a long history of military coups with the military oppressing its people. The military there has simply not been trusted, and due to frequent economic crises, Argentina has incurred a lot of debt. In such an environment, funding the armed forces was the least of its priorities ever since the Falklands War. That debt would make it hard for Argentina to pivot all that economy, twice as large as Chile's, into a war effort. Still, when in a total war, it's easier to justify cutting spending on various other items. So in the long term, it's unlikely Chile could keep spending on rearmament as much as Argentina could. Though Argentina would risk completely collapsing under the strain of arms spending if it neglected its debt obligations. Both sides would try to buy arms from abroad. The Chilean Navy and Air Force would not be able to impose a blockade, so supplies and arms would come into Argentina. Argentina would eventually be able to buy more hardware, but training personnel to be proficient when the experience base is fairly low would take years. So it's unsure who would be the winner of a multi-year-long, perhaps even half a decade-long conflict. But within a short term, which Binkov is focused on here, Chile would undoubtedly come out on top, taking control of the entire southern tip of Argentina. And remember, Binkov may talk about hypothetical wars, but only real peace can bring us all together.